But all right, enough of me spieling about here. Let's kick it into our interview with Keith Allsep of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. Well, we're pleased to once again be joined by Keith Allsep. Of course, he's the host of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. You can follow Keith at K Allsep, and of course, his podcast is at Gamecock Pod. Keith, thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Michael, it's always a pleasure to speak to the dean of podcasting.
Oh, I don't know about that, but I do appreciate the kind words, my friend. So, I got to ask you, big question there for the Gamecocks. Who's going to be the starting quarterback week one? Any idea?
Well, it's nothing that has officially been announced, but there's a lot of momentum for former Iowa State turned North Dakota State turned graduate assistant, now turned back into quarterback, Zeb Noland. He performed very well coming out of the scrimmage. I would not rule out Jason Brown, who's a transfer from a D3 program as well. He's been in the program since March, but he really didn't get much time in the spring due to COVID. He lost almost 20 pounds this summer, really reshaped his body, really worked hard. But here's the thing with Zeb Noland that they like is it's probably only going to be one or two games, and then Luke Doty will, take back over as QB1 at South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
You open up with Eastern Illinois and then you travel to East Carolina. Those are two games that are critical. I mean, absolutely critical for Shane Beamer in year one if he wants to try to get to 6 wins and get a bowl bid. And the last thing you need is either a true freshman or someone that's not familiar with that offense because that could lead to pick sixes or fumbles or throwing an interception in the end zone or in the red zone to really help keep an undermanned opponent in a game. Zeb Noland has more experience than the rest of the quarterback room combined, and he helped write this playbook and has been working on it since he arrived this summer. And he just played like 7 or 8 games at North Dakota State in the spring. So I think there's a lot of momentum right now for Zeb Noland to be the starting quarterback in game one and then to be determined once Luke Doty gets back from that injury.
So, based on what you just said there, things can change. I'm not going to hold you to this, but based on what you're hearing, is it? Do you fully expect Luke Doty's not going to be able to play in the opener?
I would really be shocked, Michael, at this point if he's able to go. I mean, he got his foot stepped on by, rather large individual and just a freak accident. And, fortunately, it was not as bad as they initially feared because there were some fears inside the program. Be a Liz Frank injury, similar to what Jake Bentley suffered against North Carolina in 2019 on the final play of the game, or potentially kicking the locker in disgust based off who you listen to on that. I guess so. There's two sides of that coin. But fortunately, it was labeled a sprain, not a fracture or a break. And so, I think it would be a minor miracle for him to be ready to go. Now, I'm not going to say he's not going to have practice, but, when you have a boot on and you can't, and it's your plant foot, that's just going to take more time. And so I think they'll be very cautious with him because he's only started a couple of games. And you really, when he comes back, you want to put him in situations where he can be successful, not having to depend on playing on one leg, particularly for a guy that's a true 4-5 guy in the 40 like Luke Doty is.
And what does it say about Shane Beamer in your mind that, like you said, I mean, we were all counting on Luke Doty to roll out there week one, but, now your alternatives, potentially a true freshman or an FCS quarterback that, of course, they didn't get to play football because of COVID last year. So he's really rusty. So it kind of seems like, it's hard to say if Shane Beamer had this in the back of his mind. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't, but credit to him where I think once again, he's just working his coaching connections to get, people in the building that in case of an emergency like this, he can go to a Zeb Nolan. So I think if you're a Gamecock fan, it gives you a little added confidence that this guy is not in over his head by any means. Cause like you said, we're all penciling in those first two games as wins. It should be easy wins. I mean, this is the SEC we're talking about here, but you drop one of those games and all of a sudden the fans are out on you. You know what I mean? So I don't know. Is that kind of how you read the situation there with Shane Beamer?
Well, Michael, I just think it's all hands on deck. This was something that internally was being talked about in the summer that they might do to go ahead and start fall practice. And then, Luke Doty, I think in his second practice in full pads in a red zone drill, gets his foot stepped on. I mean, look, I'm not assigning blame because freak accidents happen all the time, but I doubt there's any other quarterback that didn't at least make it to the first scrimmage without an injury, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that just puts you behind the eight ball, and then you have to look at the next best option and what's best for your football team. And Marcus Satterfield spoke to the media last week, and he said, look, hey, we're not asking whoever starts game one to go out and win the Heisman Trophy. We want somebody that can manage the game, that can manage the offense, get our offense into the right plays, out of the bad plays, and manage the game. And Zeb Noland may be the best guy to do that because he's got the most experience. And like you said, Jason Brown, he hasn't played since 2019. And Zeb Noland just played in April.
Mm-hmm. Now, let me ask you about Kevin Harris. I mean, potentially the best running back in the entire SEC. By all accounts, they expect him to be back in the lineup, but how realistic is that? I don't know what surgery he had. All accounts, it's a minor issue, but running back getting a back surgery doesn't sound like, something you'd want to happen leading up to a season.
Well, Michael, I mean, there's no such thing as a minor back surgery, not for a football player anyway, because football is a collision sport. It's not a contact sport. Basketball is a contact sport. Football is a collision sport. Anytime you're dealing with the spinal cord, the disc, the vertebrae, the nerves, you have to be extra careful, and it just takes time for the muscles around that. Once you make an incision, I had 2 lower back surgeries as a younger man, but that was still 30 years ago. And so I don't know. I mean, I know this. He is a quick healer. He's doing everything outside of contact. I would not expect him to be a go for the first game, possibly the first 2 games, simply because, one, South Carolina is not short on talent in the running back room. Last year, leading up to the season, Kevin Harris was not going to be the starter. Marshawn Lloyd was going to be the starter. He suffered an early non-contact ACL tear when he just planted his foot and his knee buckled a little bit, and that was it. So you've got him. You've got Zaquandre White, who was a junior college All-American, a guy that was a national top 150 prospect out of Fort Myers, Florida. Went to junior college after, I don't even want to talk about the guy that was at Florida State after Jimbo, and probably Florida State fans don't want to either. But, he was moved to defense. He left and went to JUCO. He was a JUCO All-American, came in last year, got some chances early. Ball security was an issue. So he was primarily a special teams player. And the way Harris had it going. He played a little bit of defense as well. He had a great spring. He's had a great fall camp. And so you got Marshawn Lloyd, you got Zaquandre White, you got Rashad Amos, who's 6'2", 225 pounds, and a legit 4'5" guy in the 40 that played some, broke off a 34-yard run against Georgia last year. And you have, I'm calling him Mighty Mouse because he's probably only about 5'7", 165 pounds, Juju McDowell from Lee County, Georgia. He's turned a lot of heads. I think he'll probably be an all-purpose type guy, but South Carolina feels very good about the talent and the running back room. And so I think they want to save Kevin Harris for towards the end of September when you start getting into games that really matter. And I'm not saying that Georgia game doesn't matter, but South Carolina doesn't have to beat Georgia to go to a bowl. When you get into games like Kentucky, Tennessee, Vanderbilt, Missouri, Auburn, those are the swing games that are going to determine, along with the non-conference games, that'll determine South Carolina's fate. And you want Kevin Harris and all those guys, you want all hands on deck when you get into the end of September through November into the rest of your schedule.
And there's been so many storylines coming ahead of Columbia that one that is just kind of, flew under the radar, I would say, just because of all the stuff we've already talked about. But K'Ron Prunty leaving the program, how big of a loss was that for the Gamecocks? And any idea what happened there?
Well, Michael, that was a huge loss for South Carolina. K'Ron Prunty was a guy they beat Tennessee. Ohio State was rumored to be involved, a lot of other programs. He was a freshman All-American at Kansas. And with South Carolina losing J.C. Horn, Israel Mukuamu to the NFL draft, and then losing Johnny Dixon, Shiloh Sanders, and Jamie Robinson to the transfer portal, they were really decimating the secondary. And they felt they could pair K'Ron Prunty with Cam Smith, who was an Army All-American and played behind J.C. Horn, and that they could hold down that cornerback position. Well, Cam Smith cracked a bone in his foot in the last week of workouts. He hasn't practiced yet. And then Prunty hits the transfer portal due to a personal matter, nothing related to football. And all of a sudden, South Carolina's really scrambling in the secondary, which was already, short on players with a, solid SEC experience.
Mm-hmm. Now, having said all that, question marks on both sides of the ball. Which unit do you think will be better this season? Will be Marcus Satterfield's offense or Clayton White's defense?
Well, honestly, I'm not trying to cop out, but I just think it's to be determined. I do think the strengths of this program and the best talent left behind by Will Muschamp and his staff was on both lines of scrimmage. South Carolina has experience at linebacker. They have some solid players there, but probably the most high-profile guys and the most talented guys on the roster are on the defensive front. So I would probably lean a little bit towards defense because you got 2 5-star guys and a bunch of 4-star guys on that defensive front.
Now, let's no disrespect to Vanderbilt, let's put them to the side. But if there's another game that you're most confident that South Carolina is going to win in conference this year, again, moving aside from Vanderbilt, which team is that? And you better not say Tennessee.
I have to say Tennessee.
Okay.
Tennessee or Auburn. Maybe their coach will be out of COVID protocol by then. Maybe not. Who knows? Look, no offense to your alma mater, but they're down 39 players that hit the transfer portal. They've got a new coaching staff as well. And, South Carolina and Tennessee, that's been a very close, hotly contested game for the last decade, right? Like most of those spreads have even been less than a touchdown. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, Kentucky at home is a game that South Carolina really needs to get at Tennessee, and then probably Auburn. Those would be the next three after Vanderbilt. Traveling to Missouri, Eli Drinkowitz, they're building momentum out there. That one, would probably be fourth.
Yeah, and that Kentucky series, for whatever reason, it's gone Kentucky's way more often than not, and I think that's a game that all South Carolina fans think they should win every year. Maybe this is the year under new leadership you flip that script, and you can call it an upset if you want, but if South Carolina wins that, maybe they flip the momentum to their program. You know what I mean?
Well, I can tell you it would be huge for Shane Beamer to start his tenure with a win over Kentucky. I think it took Will Muschamp until 2019 to beat Kentucky. So he was 0-3, and then he beat Kentucky, had an off week, and then beat Georgia and Athens. Led Florida after three quarters, and then the wheels fell off of the season.
Is there a must-win game, do you think, on South Carolina's schedule, or is that maybe unfair given all the transition?
Well, I think there, four must-win games on the schedule, and that is Eastern Illinois, East Carolina, Troy, and Vanderbilt. Those games are must-win games. Three of the four are at Williams-Brice Stadium. The only one that's not is a week 2 road trip to Greenville, North Carolina. And I'm still not sure why South Carolina is going on the road to Greenville, North Carolina, but they are. And so to me, those are the four must-win games. And then you have the swing games. And if you get those four games, then you only have to get 2 games out of 8 to get to 6-6 and get to a bowl game. And, the way South Carolina's schedule lays out is fair or unfair, you better be good early because you got Eastern Illinois at East Carolina, Georgia. So you should be 2-1. Then you got Kentucky, Troy, Tennessee, Vanderbilt. If South Carolina can have 5 or even be 6-1 at that point, I mean, there's really not a whole lot of wins on the back part of the schedule. At Texas A&M, Florida, at Missouri, Auburn, and Clemson. Probably Auburn at home is the best shot you got on the back side of the schedule. So South Carolina fans have to hope Shane Beamer's team can be really good in the first half of the season.
Yeah, and speaking of that Auburn game, of course, there's so many connections with the coaching staff and everything there. Do you think that's going to create, a rowdy situation there for them coming into South Carolina? And will the fans show up, or be so far removed from that the fan base will have moved on? Do you think?
Well, I mean, South Carolina's last win in football was against Auburn. And it was their first win ever over Auburn. Will Muschamp got to 2-2. And then just like the Georgia game, you pull an upset over a top 20 team and then wheels fall off.
Mm-hmm.
And, I know there was some animus, particularly with the fan base, with the way things went down with Mike Bobo, Will Friend, Tracy Rocker. Of course, he didn't stay at Auburn long either. He went back to the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
I just think this is a program that's hungry for success. I think this is a fan base that have been divided. There was a certain portion of the fan base that was never going to support Will Muschamp. no matter what he did, simply because he got fired at Florida. And I think this South Carolina fan base right now is not only hungry for wins, but they are united for the first time since the Thursday night to start the 2014 season, when South Carolina was ranked number 4 in the nation and promptly got boat raced on the first game of the SEC network by Texas A&M.
Mm-hmm.
Really the last time South Carolina's fan base has been galvanized in support of their football program.
All right, last question for you, Keith. Now that training camp, it's not officially done yet, but we're winding down here. Kind of, we should all have a better sense of what the team's going to look like this fall. Are your expectations higher or lower than where things ended, or when the camp started, and how confident are you that Shane Beamer can lead this team to a bowl trip this year?
Well, I mean, I just don't think we know, right? Like, he's never been a head coach. He was an interim head coach at Virginia Tech for a bowl game, I think in the Military Bowl against Army, right? Like, hey, Brian McClendon was interim head coach for a bowl game at Georgia. A lot of good that did South Carolina when he was the wide receivers coach. So, um, I will say this. I do think he's building a great foundation by establishing a team first culture, a family oriented atmosphere, and a lot of positive energy inside the program. Both his coordinators are first time Power 5 coordinators. I think each has a uniquely qualified resume that you can make an argument for why they would be successful. Ultimately, it's going to be up to the players. I do think Shane Beamer may be the right man at the right time, but he needs more help. Obviously, if South Carolina had the talent to win 9 or 10 games, he would not be the head coach. Muschamp would still be the head coach. That is not the case. This is a rebuilding job. I would caution the fan base to be patient, but if you look back, the first 2 years of the Will Muschamp era, he went from a team he took over that won 3 games and lost to the Citadel at Williams-Brice Stadium to going to a bowl game. And then the next year, he won 9 games and beat Michigan and Jim Harbaugh in Tampa on a cool, rainy day. I was there. And ultimately, though, he was not successful. So I think we'll just have to see if Shane Beamer is a long-term solution to, the program at South Carolina. But I've been very impressed outside of him getting his quarterback hurt and, not even getting him to the first scrimmage healthy, let alone the first game. I'm encouraged by, everything he's done, the coaching staff, the culture, the summer of Shane, as we called it on our podcast, with the momentum in recruiting and putting together a top 15, top 20 recruiting class. Everything's been positive for Shane Beamer. They did have some hiccups with Doty's injury, Prunty hitting the transfer portal. We'll just have to see if they're able to overcome all of that.
All right, Keith, I really appreciate you hopping on the line. Of course, everybody's got to give him a follow at Allsep and check out his pod, the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, the go-to podcast for all your South Carolina information. Keith, I really appreciate you.
My pleasure, Michael. Great speaking with you as always, and look forward to having you back on our show hopefully sometime soon.
All right, so I just want to say thanks again to Keith for hopping on the line. I'm actually going to be on his show later in the week, so if you subscribe to that as well, you look forward to that. Me spieling on here on Keith's show, so looking forward to that. And looking forward to Cousin Shane being on the next episode of the show. He will be back, and I'm sure we'll have a lot more to talk about on the next episode. But that's going to do it for this episode, and I do appreciate each and every one of you for hanging out and just hanging out all throughout the off season. And now that we're here during the season, the numbers are going through the roof. YouTube's going through the numbers are climbing. So I really appreciate all the feedback we've been getting. And even people have been telling us things they don't like. And hey, we appreciate that just as much, because that's how we know how to improve the show. So, give us some feedback, whether it's on Twitter or YouTube, or, DM us on the social medias, whatever you want to do. Shoot us an email at thatsecpodcast@gmail.com. And again, that's how you get us those 5-star written reviews. If you want your koozies, we're seeing an uptick in the reviews. The reviews are going through the roof. But people, if you don't reach out to us at thatsecpodcast@gmail.com and let us know that you wrote that review, we can't send you a beer koozie free of charge. We got all 14 teams represented. So we really do appreciate each and every one of those, and I appreciate everybody for hanging out. We'll catch you on the next one.